Okay. Check. That's better. Okay, it doesn't turn out. Okay, let's do it like that. Okay, so sorry about the small technical issues. So welcome to this visual effect graph presentation. So I'm Julien, I'm a graphics engineer, and here is Thomas, visual effect artist. We are both from Unity Paris, where we are developing the visual effect graph. So we're going to start this session by talking about the concept and philosophy of the visual effect graph. Then there will be a technical overview. After that, we will do a live breakdown of an effect we made for a demo we released a few months ago. And finally, we're going to finish with the roadmap of the upcoming features. But let's start this presentation with a small video of, that showcases a various range of effects that we put together during the development of the tool. So, what is the visual effect graph? So, the visual effect graph is a brand new tool we are bringing to Unity to create a next generation visual effect. We mainly focused on a particle effect at the moment. So, it is fully nodal with an hybrid stack node-based paradigm. It is also fully programmable and extensible. When you're actually working on a visual effect, you're working on an asset, on a visual effect asset. You can then instantiate that asset in the scene using visual effect component. And then per component, you can override parameters and send events, either via the inspector or scripting API or timeline. Also, we are performing all the simulation for the particles on GPU, so you need to have compute-capable devices to run the visual effect graph. When we designed the tool, we wanted it to be artist-friendly. So it is fully visual, there's no code involved. You don't have to write a single line of C# to create an effect. Also, as all the behavior are compiled within an asset, it is fully data-driven. So there's a scalability of features. It means that you don't have to rely on us to implement new behaviors via C++ module, for instance. So you build your own set of features, can reuse them, and have your set of features library. We also wanted the tool to be able to scale from very small effects like sparks or a puff of smoke to large-scale effect with million particles and very complex behaviors. It is also worth noting that visual scripting for VFX is an industry trend in the film industry for years and is now a reality in the game industry. So now, let's do a small comparison between CPU and GPU particles. So the current particle system in Unity is using CPU particles. So the simulation is performed on CPU, and then the data are uploaded to GPU each frame for rendering. In the visual effect graph, we do everything on GPU. So we can have a lot more particles with more complex behavior due to the parallel natures of GPU. However, if you want to use the physics systems, you have to simulate on CPU because the physics run on the CPU. So to have, say, collisions on GPU, you need to rely on other scene representations, like primitives, sign distance fields, or screen space collision with depth buffer. Also, if you want your particles to interact with your gameplay, you need to be on CPU, because reading back data from GPU to CPU is a costly operation. On GPU, you also have access to frame buffers data, so you can perform like screen space effect that you cannot achieve on CPU. So both CPU and GPU particles are useful and can cohabit together. depending on your effect needs. So now I let Thomas talk about the concept and philosophy of the tool.
Thank you, Julien. Visual Effects Graph relies on 3 different levels of editing that are intended for 3 different kind of audiences. We represented them as a pyramid, with the bottom is the asset instance configuration that is intended for everyone. Basically, everyone who's gonna use an effect and put it in a scene can just take an asset from the project, instantiate it in the scene, and start configure it with editing parameters and calling events and script with the component. So basically, it's just the use of the same as a use of a material. Then, at the second level of editing, there is the graph asset authoring. This level of editing is intended for visual effects artists. In this graph, the visual effects artist will define one or many components of the effect, and it will define also a parameter interface, and also define an event interface in order to interact with timeline. And finally, the last level of editing is what we call the feature creation. It's basically extending the features of visual effects graph. This level of editing is intended for highly skilled visual effects artists or even programmers. Here is a representation of our graph, and the visual effects graph use bidirectional bidirectional flow. First, a vertical logic flow that connects together what we call a context, and every context is just in charge of one stage of processing. We have at the top, for instance, the spawn context that will compute how many particles need to be created. Then we have the initialize context that will perform the computation at the birth of the particle. So it will initialize the particle with values. Then we have the update context that will be executed every frame for every living particle. And at the end, we have the output context that we take the simulated particles and give one shape to every particle. So we have one simulation and we can give one shape to every particle, but we can also give many shapes to every particle. In every context, we can put what we call a node block, one or many node blocks. These are nodes that we can stack inside the context, and we can configure in order to add a behavior. So you can reorder them, and you can also connect other nodes to this context in order to parameterize and generate mass expression in order to have really complex behaviors. These nodes are what we call operator, and this is the other flow in the visual effects graph. It's horizontal flow, and it goes from left to right. By chaining operators, you are able to generate mass operations, sample textures, sample curves and gradients, and perform really complex and custom behaviors. Now, let's talk about attributes. Attributes are what define particles. It's their state. And a particle can be defined by its position, its velocity, its color. And in visual effects graph, we only store whatever is needed for your particles. For instance, if you want for your particle to live forever, you don't have to store its age or its lifetime. So you gain 2 floats per particle. So it's a huge memory saver. In visual effects graph, we have a library of standard attributes, position, color, velocity, but you can also come up with your own custom named attributes. And of course, the way to read and write attributes is built in. So you can write attributes as constant values, random values, from curves, or even from texture. And of course, while making math operations with operators, you can get attributes from your simulation. Let's now talk about the parameter interface. For all of you who are already familiar with shader graph, the parameter interface is defined in the same way as shader graph in the Blackboard window. And in this Blackboard window, you will be able to create expose parameter that will be visible at the component level. So here, whenever I create a parameter here, it's become visible in the inspector on my effect in the scene. So I can change the value, create an override, and also edit the values using dedicated gizmos. And of course, once I have created one parameter in the Blackboard, I can drag it into the graph and connect it to other operators or blocks in order to read this value and use it directly in my graph. Events are pretty much the same, but will trigger timed events. So they will perform turning on and off spawn of particles. We have two default events named onPlay and onStop, but you can also create custom named events. Events also can handle an attribute payload. For instance, if you create an explode event, you can attach a position attribute and send it via C#. So, for instance, if your gameplay tells explode at this position, we will be able to read this position in the graph in order to explode at this specific position. So we have a C# API to do that, but we can also use timeline in order to trigger events. Now Julien will make a small technical overview about VFX.
Thanks. So from your the graph that you've created for your effect, how do we generate the data for the effect and simulate and render it efficiently? So every time you're modifying your graph, like plugging a node into a slot or adding a block to a context, we will trigger what we call the recompilation of the effect. So basically, from the high-level view that you're manipulating, we will generate a lower-level view that we call the expression graph. It is then fed into the compiler and will generate a bunch of data. So we will generate some data layout for your particles. So as Thomas said, we will only store needed attributes for the simulation. We will generate shaders. So we will generate compute shaders for simulation, so for the init and update context, and vertex and pixel shaders pairs for the rendering, so the output. We also have a small CPU interpreter, so we are able to evaluate some expression on CPU. So basically, everything that is per particle invariant will be evaluated only once on CPU instead of once per particle on GPU. So we generate the bytecode for this interpreter. Also, the property sheet to handle the expose parameters and the events. And finally, as you can have many systems in effect, we generate a list of VFX systems that bind everything together. So our target for the recompilation of an effect is to be under 500 milliseconds, so that it's fast to iterate. So let's take a little use case here. So this is the graph of the pink Unity logo you saw in the first video. So it's basically, we have a rotating, moving sphere that is spawning particles, and those particles are then being attracted by a vector field that has the shape of the Unity logo. So let's take this graph, and from this graph, what will generate shader code and what will generate CPU bytecode. No, sorry. Okay. So here we fetch some particle attributes. So we fetch the particle position because we will modulate the color of the particle based on the sphere distance. And also we fetch the particle velocity to be able to stretch the particle based on their speed. So this is per particle, so it's on GPU. So all the operations that follow will generate shader code. The rest will be evaluated on CPU. We also have the concept of, do we know an expression at compile time, when compiling the effect, or do we know it at runtime? So for instance, here we're using the time of the effect, so to move the sphere, to rotate a bit the vector field and stuff like that. And so this is unknown at compile time because the effect time will change over time. So we also have an expose parameters, so this is the sphere radius to spawn the particles. So it is unknown at compile time as well, because it can be overridden per component via script, etc. So all the operations that follows are only known at runtime. So all the dark blue stuff can be stripped away and optimized away by performing constant folding. So we evaluate them when compiling, and then it's optimized. It's removed from the runtime. So of course we don't do that on this high level, but we have a lower level representation of the graph, which is an intermediate language. So having that kind of intermediate language allows us to easily add several backends. So we can think of CPU dots particles in the future, for instance. And so we also generate two versions of the runtime data. So one, when you're editing your effect, because we don't optimize the effect when you're editing it, because we want you to be able to change any values without recompiling the graph. And for the runtime and optimized effect, we perform all the optimization. A word on rendering. So we had a bunch of built-in primitives to give shape to your particles, point, lines, quads, meshes, etc. We also have some built-in shaders. So we have unlit particles, we have HDRP lit particles, so that works with the HDRP pipeline. We have decals, we have retrace sphere and stuff like that. We also implemented like most commonly used features in VFX, like soft particles and flipbook blending. So you have an example here of different blending modes for your flipbooks. So on the left, it's no interpolation, so it's frame by frame. In the middle, it's a classical linear interpolation between frames. And on the right, it's using another texture, which is the motion vector to perform the interpolation. So also we plan to add a shader graph integration to the VFX graph, so you're not limited to fixed functionality, and you can customize your pixel shaders using shader graph for your particles. So this is an example of different output types for the same simulation. A word on sorting. So it's always difficult to have a correct sorting with transparent objects. We didn't implement like any global sorting or order-independent transparency because this goes out of the scope of the tool. Because if we do that, we need to sort everything together, including like all the transparent objects that are not particles. So instead, we gave control at different granularity, so we can sort per component. So it's the classical Unity sorting, transparent sorting back to front. Also, as you can have many systems in the same effect, you can give a sorting priority per system. And we also have GPU per particle sorting. So you see an example here. On the left, there's no sorting, so you see some artifacts. And on the right, the particles are correctly sorted. A word on input data. So GPU only handle texture and buffers. So for instance, we will bake all the curves and gradients of your effect will be baked in a texture to be read by the GPU and the shaders. We also have the concept of point caches to pass data to the particle simulation. So point caches are basically texture in which you pack some attributes. So it can be a list of position, of velocity, of whatever attributes you need, and you can then read this list of attributes to drive your simulation. We also have what we call volumetric data. So it's basically a 3D texture and an oriented box to place that data in the scene. So we have vector fields. So vector field is basically 1 force per voxel. So it's used to implement complex local forces. And we also have sign distance field. So sign distance field will store distance per voxel, and this distance will define a surface. So the texture 3D will actually define a surface. So we can do a lot of stuff with that. So we implemented 2 blocks with sign distance field, so to have collision and to have conformance. So here is an example of some prototype we made when we implemented that feature. So this is conformance. So we have a sign distance field of a teapot, and so the particles are being attracted to the teapot surface and stick to the teapot surface. And this is an example of the collision. So the same sign distance field to perform collision with millions of particles on the teapot. Alongside the visual effect graph, we are developing what we call the VFX toolbox. So it's a suite of tools that allows to generate those data that will then be fed to the visual effect graph. So in that suite of tools, we have some Houdini exporters to generate sign distance field, vector fields, and point caches from Houdini. We have a built-in point cache baker in Unity to create point cache from mesh, so basically scatter some points on static mesh. And we also have an image sequencer to assemble some flipbooks from a set of images, as you see on this small GIF. So now it's time for the live breakdown. So we're going to show you a video first, a video of a demo we released like a few last year, or yeah, maybe last year. So it's a demo. The setup is in a spaceship, and we developed that demo to showcase all the visual effect graph in a real case scenario. So let's play the demo. It's if it works, or maybe the offline one. Yeah. Okay. We have the video.
Safely down there, and I hope you can hear me. I can't hear anything, the whole system's busted. There you are. I see you in the monitor now.
Security check in progress.
Good to see you well.
Access granted.
There's a secure shell terminal there, just where you are. Put in the coordinates and get us to the landing site. You have to get us out of here now.
Select landing target.
There it is. Hurry up, we don't have much time.
Landing target located. Attention. Multiple weapon signatures detected. Incoming. Shield taking damage. Warning. Power down to 32%. Substantial damage to shield. Power down to 17%. Core energy depleted. Shield power down to 9%.
Sorry to hear. Sorry.
Warning. Shield has been deactivated.
let's open the editor and see how one of these most famous effects is made. So here we are in the spaceship on the holographic table, and this is the pin screen. So to make this effect, we use the visual effects graph in a really custom way. So here is a quick breakdown of the scene. So we have the effect at the center, and it's been lit using one point light here, and also it's been lit using one spotlight at the top. So for this effect, every particle is just one pin of this holographic table, and here on the right, here is the graph we used for this effect. So it's only containing one system, and it uses a lot of operators and math operations in order to perform this simulation. So let's take first a quick overview of how it's made. So for this system, we have first the spawn context that will spawn a single burst of 64K particles that are taken from a point cache. Then these points from the point cache we gather the positions, and we use this position for the initialize. Then we have a simple simulation that will not update particle velocity, neither age or kill particle if they are too old. Instead, we will only do position blending and animation. So it's gonna be here, and I'm gonna cover this subject in some minutes. I will finish by the rendering. We used 3 different kind of outputs. So in order to render the pins, we used simple quads instead of geometry. And also we used another context in order to render rays of light that simulates the lighting for the most tall pins. Now let's get into detail of the simulation and the operations we used to make this effect. So in the initialize, as I said earlier, we used a point cache in order to get the values, and basically this point cache was stores the position, the 2D position at the base of every pin on the table. So to bake this point cache, we used Houdini to scatter points on the surface, and we used many relaxed iterations, so every point is separated from its neighbor by a common distance. So we have a uniform distribution. So in the initialize, we set the position, and then we will perform a 2D backup of the position that we will set into a custom attribute named base position. Then, in the update, we will perform a position blending operation, so it's going to be blended over time to reach a target position. So how do we perform this position computation? And it's basically a composition of many components. First, we have the base position, so the 2D position on screen. Then we have an height field that will be the height field of the terrain. Then we will have a scan wave that goes from the center to the outer of the table. And then we have a glitchy pattern that adds some noise. Let me toggle every component for you so you can see it. So in the blackboard, I have exposed local variables in order to disable everything. So here I have nothing, and I will be able to enable the height field here. Then I can add the scan wave. So it's going to be from the inner to the outer. Then I can disable the height field to see better the scan wave. And then we have the glitches on top of it. And every glitch is moving not only upwards, but also a bit horizontally every pin. So let's go on the height field. So for the height field, we just sample a texture that is basically a grayscale texture that looks like this. And in order to sample this texture, we use this operator named sample texture 2D. That's just the same as in a shader graph, where you send the texture, and to sample this texture, you need coordinates. And to generate these coordinates, we used the get base position, and base position was this attribute we just backed up in the initialize. And in order to perform scaling and adjusting the position, we used a parameter named AA box control, and basically this parameter enables us to move around this height field, to scale it, and also to scale the height of the height field and put it to 0. So basically, this parameter is animated using a timeline in the demo. And to perform this operation is just a simple multiplication and addition. So it's a scale and a bias. Then let's talk a bit about the scan wave. So I will disable the height field and enable only the scan wave. So this effect is just animating a ripple from the center to the outer of the table. And in order to animate this ripple, we basically used a noise in order to make it not so uniform. So if I disable the noise here, you will see that the ripple is totally uniform. And the ripple is driven here by this curve. So I can adjust the shape of this ripple directly using this curve. So I can perform really custom shapes. And in order to animate this ripple, I just perform distance to the center that will perform a 1D coordinate that goes outwards. And to animate this coordinate, I use periodic total time that will just perform an offset. So it will make the ripple scroll from the inside to the outside. And then we added some noise in order to this distance in order to add some kind of variation. And so we have a library of 1D to 3D noise. And to perform this noise computation, we use the 2D base position, and we animate it using the total time. And then we can also perform scaling on the noise to have more or less rough noise. So that's it for the ripple. And then let's finish by the glitches. So for the in order to make the glitches, it's roughly the same as the height field. So we used a glitch texture that is defined here. So it's not a grayscale texture, but instead it is 3 components. So it will push in X, Y, and Z axis. So you will have three-dimensional noise. And in order to compute this position, the texture is rectangular. And here we have a radial effect. And in order to perform that, we have this node that performs rectangular to polar coordinate computation. And so in order to animate it, we also used noise in order to scroll randomly this texture. So in the end, it's just applied as the other components. And also we use this noise in order to change slightly the brightness of every pin. So the effect is more noticeable. So I will enable again all components here. And let's get into details for the rendering for every pin. So as I said earlier, for rendering every pin, we do not decide to use an actual cylinder geometry because it would have too many vertices and it would be too expensive to render. So instead, as all the pins are really small, we chose to use two quads of geometry. One stretch quad that goes from the surface of the table to the pin's target position. So this quad will be oriented towards the camera. So using a connect target, we connect the base of the table to the pin's actual location. And we have another quad that is actually the pin's cap. And basically it will terminate the pin at the top. And in order to make this rounded effect, we just used procedural normal bending for the pin's cap. And in order to bend the cylinder's body, we used a simple 1D normal map, one directional. Then for the light rays, basically we take the simulation of every pin, and for all the pins that go above one threshold, we will decide to render one particle of light. So all these particles will be stretched out towards a virtual position, above the table. So it's going to be probably around here. And in order to render these rays, so we compute the height, and we decide that the higher the pin will be, the more bright the ray of light will be. So that's why every ray of light seems to react to the light field. And in the end, as it would be a lot of rays of light, and all of these are translucent, it would be a huge performance issue. So we decided here to curl one particle out of n particles. So we decided to only keep one particle out of 16. So it's a huge performance saver, and all other particles are just not rendered. So there is not even a vertex for this. So that's it. That concludes this breakdown for this effect. And I will let Julien conclude using our roadmap.
Thanks. So the roadmap. So the visual effect graph is available as a package via the package manager. It is still in preview. It's in preview state. So it means that it's still being developed, and it's not really production ready yet. So for 2019.2, we want to add lots of features. First, improve the HDRP integration. So add the next HDRP features to the visual effect graph, like the half resolution rendering, for instance. One big feature we want to add is subgraphs. So subgraphs will basically allow you to create nodes made of other nodes, and then reuse them, share them with others, and it will be very powerful. We want to add static mesh sampling operator in the graph, to add motion vectors as well, which are vital if you're using temporal anti-aliasing or motion blur. We want to continue the lightweight support by adding lead particles to lightweight, because at the moment there's only unlead particles to lightweight. And we want to add ribbon and trace. For 19.3, it's our target to be out of preview. For 19.3, we want a tight integration with shader graph, so you will be able to add some shaders, some custom shader graph shaders into the visual effect graph, and access all the properties from the graph. We want to add skin mesh sampling as well, and also some tools to help you profile and debug your effects. So this concludes the presentation. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And
we need your feedback. So if you have questions, you can ask here. But we also have a booth in the hall next to this room. So feel free to come at us if you have other questions or you want a demo.
thank you.
Thank you.